Hi, my name is Sohrab Salimi. I'm the founder and CEO of Scrum Academy in Cologne, Germany. As part of our Agile Insights series, I had the pleasure to interview Marty Cagan. Marty, the former head of product at eBay, is one of my heroes in the space of product management and product leadership. He wrote two of the key books in that space, one being called Inspired and the other Empowered. In our conversation, we focused on his recent book called Empowered. That book specifically is dedicated to product leaders. I asked him why he wrote that book, because writing a book is a very long process. And the reason he mentioned is that there are so many teams out there that actually want to build great products in a great way, but the key impediment to them being able to do that is leadership, especially product leadership. And one of the key problems? Product leaders themselves don't know how to be great product leaders. In his book, he starts out with the topic of coaching. He mentions that coaching, which is teaching people how to do their job, is the key responsibility of every product leader. One of the key problems here, a lot of the product leaders don't know how to be great product managers themselves. So when we want to build great product leaders, we have to start at the root. We have to educate them about all the tips and tricks, about all the tools that great product managers need. In addition, we need to teach them coaching skills and ask them to have this passion for people development. One of the fundamental shifts that every product leader needs to understand is that when they move from product management to product leadership, their product changes. They're not responsible any longer for the product that their customers use. Their product is the team. Their product is the product manager or multiple product managers that ultimately build those products. And that shift, together with the passion for people development, enables them to build up the coaching skills in order to become great product leaders. In addition to the topic of coaching, Marty and I covered a few of the other topics he has in his book, mainly staffing, product vision, and product principles. We closed our conversation with the topic of transformation and responsibility. With regards to transformation, Marty's key point was that a lot of organizations, actually most of the transformations, completely fail. And most organizations would be better off if they don't go for that transformation at all. And one of the key success factors, big surprise, is that the CEO not only needs to be on board, but that the CEO needs to be the driving factor for that transformation, the driving force behind it. And with regards to responsibility, Marty, similar to I, believes that every product not only is a product that is loved by users and works for the company, but also is a product that helps our society become a better version of itself. I really hope that you will enjoy this conversation between Marty and myself. And if you're interested in becoming a better product leader, a better product manager, or just a better coach, subscribe to our channel in whatever social media channel you're currently watching this video. There will be more great conversations coming up, and there is a lot of other great content on our website under the Agile Insights. I'll see you there. All right. So, as we're based in Germany, we start right on time. Welcome everyone to this very first Agile Insights conversation session where Marty Cagan, my guest today, and myself, Sohrab Salimi, will join into a conversation around the topic of product leadership. I'm very excited to have Marty with us. Before I start with a brief introduction of Marty, a few of the working agreements or whatever we want to call them. I have muted everyone in this session, so if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I will take them up and then I will address them to Marty based on the time when it fits best. And every question that we don't get to answer in this short time that we have with Marty, this 1 hour, maybe I can send them to Marty later on and maybe he can share some thoughts with us. He has all great blog posts on almost every topic related to product management and product leadership. So most likely it will be just grabbing some of those articles and then sharing them with all of you. Now, with regards to today's sessions, I'm very happy and very honored to have you, Marty, join us. I've been following your work for many years, read both of your books, Inspired and Empowered, and participated in also both of those workshops, which I found very insightful in addition to those books. You've been a product leader yourself, you've been a product manager yourself in multiple companies, and you can see that. So when you give advice, when you write about stuff, it always connects really well to the real world. So this is not just a consultant's view, but also being a consultant, being a coach, you've managed to see a lot of organizations. And I think that also comes back into your perspective and broadens it and helps you to translate a lot of the things that you've seen or distill it in the blog articles and the books that you write. So thank you for all the work that you've done so far. And yeah, today I want to focus our conversation on the topic of product leadership, which is the main content of this book, of your latest book, Empowered. And before we go into the individual topics that you cover there, such as coaching and staffing and the team topology and product strategy, I want to start with a question. There are so many leadership books out there. Why did you decide to write your own book around the topic of product leadership? What made you do that? Spend this amount of time to create such a wonderful book?
Well, thanks. And thanks again, Sohrab, for inviting me. So there, leadership is one of those words, kind of like strategy. It's very ambiguous. There are really, I don't know how many, literally though, I bet there's over 100,000 books out there on leadership in general. There are so many, but of course, there are much smaller that focus on what we call product leadership. And just to be clear, I mean, I don't know, who knows who gets to define the official definition. The way I define product leadership is a manager of engineers, a manager of designers, or a manager of product managers. Those are the three core areas in a product organization. And so when we say product leadership, we mean that. It might be a chief technology officer, a chief product officer, a director of design, user research would be included in that, data science would be included in that. But that's what we mean by product leadership. And frankly, I know very few books that talk about that. Very few. I wish there were more. There are some good books out there around engineering leadership, and there are some very good books around design leadership. But talking more generally about product leadership, I think it's a problem. And I didn't intend to write this book, to be honest. My little bubble that I was in, the sort of Silicon Valley bubble, what I like to do is what I wrote about in Inspired. I love the whole product discovery topic. I love how engineers and designers and product managers work together to solve hard problems. To me, that's why I work in this area. That's what I love to do. But what I found out, it really happened with the second edition of Inspired, because it spread much beyond, it spread way beyond the sort of Silicon Valley world that I was in. And I started meeting companies where the engineers, the product managers, they would tell me that they want to work that way, but their management doesn't let them work that way. Yeah. Literally doesn't let them work that way. And this was so bizarre to me, because I mean, why in the world wouldn't they want to work like the most successful, most valuable companies in the world? It's not like you're asking them to work like a charity or something. You're asking them to work like the most valuable companies on the planet. So why wouldn't they want to? But turns out there are several reasons. And I realized that while we could point an engineer at a book like Inspired and say, read this to learn how the best companies solve these problems, I couldn't point an engineering leader at a book and say, this describes, how Amazon works, or this describes how Netflix works. And that seemed like a problem. And so I realized that, okay, well, maybe I should write that. It's always, writing a book is a huge project. It takes years. And so I wasn't actually anxious to do that, but I felt like there was a big hole. And now I feel much better. When I work with a team, I can say, look, you can read the theory in here for the engineers and designers and product managers, and for your leaders, they should read the theory here. So I feel like I'm covering both. There's also one more group that I'm not tackling, but one of my partners is, which is the CEOs, the senior leaders, because as you probably know, a lot of companies do want to transform. They know they're not working like the best companies and they believe they need to. And that's a whole other problem. That's not product leadership, that's company leadership.
Organizational leadership, yes.
Yes, and that's a big topic, which I know you're probably interested in as well. But yeah, but that's I think those 3 books, ultimately, that's sort of the vision, is that we'll have 3 books. They're all hard, though. They're all hard topics for sure.
You with your other partner, you're referring to Leah?
Well, Leah's helping, but Jonathan Moore, who's actually based in London, but Jonathan personally led transformations at Trainline, which was one of the best tech companies I know of.
I remember the case study, yes.
Yeah, and at The Guardian, which, by the way, 200-year-old company. And I first met Jonathan when he was a brand new product manager at the BBC. And just I've been a fan of his literally for more than 20 years. So yeah, he's writing that one. And all of the partners are kind of contributing, including Leah.
Yeah, and I think Jonathan wrote an article also on the SVPG blog, Transformation in Action, right?
Right.
So everyone listening, you can either Google it yourself, Transformation in Action, on the svpg.com website, or we will send that link to the article to you. It's really good. And maybe in this conversation today, we also get to talk a bit about transformation, but let's stick to the topic of product leadership first before going to even that level higher of that higher level of leadership. So you already mentioned why you started or why you wrote this book, right? Because many of the people in those specific roles, maybe some of them didn't even know that this was their specific role. And even if they knew, they didn't know how to act in that role in order to help their organization, being the empowered teams and the empowered product managers, to be more successful and deliver better products in a better way. You also mentioned whom you consider to be a product leader. So a manager of product managers, a manager of designers, or a manager of engineers. Now, in your book, you specifically cover several areas. You start out with coaching, and then you go into staffing, product vision and principles, the team topology, which I found very interesting also when I joined your workshop, the product strategy, team objectives, and finally you have a short chapter around the topic of transformation. I want to use our time to dive deeper into each of those, as many as we can cover today. And I'll start in the same order as you have them in your book, with the topic of coaching. Why do you put this topic of coaching at the center, at the very beginning of your book? And what do you consider this coaching to be, and how do you think product leaders can become better coaches? So 3 questions at once. Sorry for that.
Yeah, no, but I actually think that is the most important question, really, of all. And the reason for that is because what you started with. You started by saying there are so many companies where the leaders don't even know really what they're supposed to do, and largely because they've never seen it done well. They've never worked in a company that did this well. And you need to realize that is a global problem. Even in the very best, even in the heart of San Francisco, the heart of Seattle, even anywhere, Shanghai, this is the key problem, that so many people have never learned this before. Now, the advantage at the best companies is that they understand that their obligation is to share that knowledge. And that's what coaching is somebody who knows how to do this, teaching somebody who doesn't yet know how to do this. That is the number one responsibility of a manager, And I was taught that right from the beginning of my career. I spent the first 10 years of my career as an engineer, and I went through HP. I worked at HP Labs, which was sort of the Google of the day. It was known as the most consistently innovative company of their day. And their engineering leadership program, it's a whole thing called the HP way. It was a great advantage, which was honestly pure luck that I got to do that. But that was right at the beginning, that good engineers get promoted to management, and those engineer managers know that their primary responsibility is to build more good engineers. Yeah. And so I was literally evaluated by how many engineers I could get through the promotion process, which means you have to convince, not only does the person have to be ready, but you have to convince other managers that they've earned it. So I came from that school. If you in the book Empowered, I actually dedicated the book to a guy named Bill Campbell, who was known as the coach of Silicon Valley. And he literally told Steve Jobs, he coached Jeff Bezos, he coached Larry and Sergey at Google, among many others, but he told all of them that this is what you do. Your number one responsibility is to develop your people. That's how you really scale. That is how you grow. And of course, if you've got great leaders that understand that, that's what they do. But if you have leaders that have never worked at a good tech product company, even if they want to coach, they don't necessarily know how. They've never seen it before. So to me, that's the most important topic, is convincing more of the industry that they need to get serious about coaching. And you might have noticed the single biggest section of the book Empowered was on coaching, because I'd heard this from so many people, even CEOs telling me, okay, I want to coach, but I don't know how. So what I did is I provided about 50 topics that every week you could pick one topic and you could do that together. You could talk about it together. And to me, one of the best things about that book is how many people have told me that's exactly what they're doing. Every week they pick a different topic. This week we're going to talk about making good decisions in difficult situations. Or this week we're going to talk about how to run a good product meeting, or whatever. And they focus on that and they talk about it together. And I think that's great to see, because, okay, even if they don't have the experience of doing it themselves, they do have other world experience, and they could talk about it together. They could try things together. The manager could give feedback to the person about how they're perceiving them in these situations. And I really think that's great. And of course, the other thing is, and I mentioned this in the book, is sometimes the way you fill this gap is you get a coach. There are people that provide coaching. One of my favorite coaches is actually in Hamburg. Her name is Petra Willy. Some of you may know Petra. If you don't, you should check her out. She wrote a book on coaching, actually. I provided a foreword for the book. I met her when she was a brand new product manager at Zing. Many of you know Zing, the network.
The German version of LinkedIn, yeah.
That's right. And she just kept getting promoted and doing better and better, and then she now coaches others on products. So that's the other way you can sort of fill that gap. But this is the number one responsibility of every people manager, is to develop their people. And if I could change one thing in the product world, it would be that too many managers don't seem to understand that is the primary job.
That is the primary. That's very interesting that you point this out, because you might not know this, Marty. I have a background in medicine. So I actually graduated from medical school, but then I joined the world of consulting, and then went into my own entrepreneurial endeavors. But in medicine, it is very normal for any attending physician that their primary job is to basically grow the next generation of physicians. So when I got into the business world, it was very unnormal for me that there wasn't that many people focused on my personal development, on my growth, other than the regular feedback sessions you have. And I mean, I worked at Bain, which is a very well-run organization as a consulting company, and we had very good feedback conversation, but it was not the systematic development of talent that you would see in a hospital. So the analogy that, or the point that you're bringing up now, right, that this is a manager's primary job. It absolutely is, because otherwise, how are people going to learn? University only provides us with so much.
That's
Everything
right.
else we have to learn in the workspace. And if I look at people that I work with, organizations that I've supported, I mean, some of them don't even know like how to handle their email inbox, let alone create a product strategy. And somehow they have to learn it. And who else is better than that than their manager? But that also means, Marty, that the people in those positions need to have those skills themselves, right? In some areas where you coach, you don't necessarily have to be able to do those things yourself. But in what I'm sensing you saying, like the areas that you cover in your book, let's say product strategy, how are you going to coach someone on product strategy if you haven't created product strategies yourself, and good ones, right?
Right.
So you need to build those capabilities first to then be able to coach them to others. Or how do you see that?
Well, this is, I'm actually glad you pointed that out, because I think this is missed by so many people. You know, there are companies around the world which don't seem to understand this. They think that anybody can be a people manager. And what they don't understand is that the primary requirement to actually be a manager of, say, a designer or of, say, an engineer is that you have to really know design, or you have to really know engineering. If you don't have that depth, and it's one of those things that, you know, they would laugh you right out of the building at Apple, at Amazon, at Google, if you tried to say, yeah, I'm managing engineers, but I've never done engineering before. They would chase you out of the building. Their whole premise is, no, you have to have that depth, because then you're able to not only coach and develop your people, but you also understand what goes into a good strategy. You understand where a good vision comes from. So this is a fundamental principle that isn't talked about enough, but I find it's true in every good company. They don't necessarily call it out, I think, because so many of them just think it's obvious. Of course, your leaders have to know what they're leading, but you know that not everybody in the world seems to understand that.
Yeah. I mean, even if you look at Apple itself, and maybe this is why Apple is so focused on that today, because at some point they invited someone to become CEO with John Scully, who didn't really know anything about what the organization was doing, and seeing where that took the organization. That's and only right. Someone like Steve Jobs coming back and saving it maybe reminded them, because there was a time where people thought a great manager in company X and industry X could also be a great manager in any other industry, right? They were not looking for that depth, for that domain expertise that you're referring to.
No, it's so true. And and it was so sad what happened at Apple. You know, the same thing happened at Microsoft. If you remember with Ballmer, they took yes. a salesperson and thought they could run fundamentally a product company. And so, I mean, that mistake has happened several times. I think over time, the industry has got a much better understanding that if you are a product company, fundamentally, you better have product leaders. You better have leaders that really know what they are talking about and can contribute there. And so, yeah, there's lots of examples. My favorite venture capitalists, they believe strongly that that whole idea of the sort of professional manager is a myth. And what you really need are people who are deep, and they believe in developing the founders. It's a lot easier to take the founder and give them the skills to lead than it is to take some generic manager and give them the knowledge to be an effective CEO.
Absolutely. And I mean, even at Google, where they wanted to have adult supervision, as they called it back then, for Larry and Sergey, they got someone in who was an engineer himself and had that depth.
That's right.
Eric Schmidt. Yeah. So,
and by the way, that was because Bill Campbell, who was coaching Larry and Sergey, understood how important this was. In fact, Bill Campbell has another quote that I love. It's a little off your topic, but it's a great one, which is the single most important thing of all in a tech-powered company are your engineers.
Yeah, yeah.
And I really believe that's true. Obviously, maybe I'm biased because I started as an engineer, but I do believe that is true. Yeah. And that's why there's nothing that makes me angrier than when I meet a company that is outsourcing their engineers.
Yeah, to somewhere else. Not that those outsourced engineers can't do a good job, right, but they don't know the context. They're not as committed to the organization. They probably would not go and provide ideas, what can be done next. They don't build up the understanding of the customers. All of those things you miss out when you do that outsourcing of engineering to somewhere else.
Yes.
Yeah. So going back to the topic of coaching, what I heard you say is basically, in order to be a great coach, you need to have that depth, right? So you need to have the understanding of the domain that you're coaching. You probably also need to have coaching skills, because just having that depth doesn't immediately mean that you have also the skills to teach it, to coach people. And I also think you need to have the passion of developing people. Now, when you help organizations, and I guess you do that, select maybe future product leaders, what do you look for with regards to this topic of coaching as the first and most important one?
Yes. Well, first of all, I would agree. Those are kind of the three things you need. The good news is the first one is the hard one. The other two are not that hard. In fact, the single biggest thing I spend time with new managers is that second one you listed, which is, okay, now you need to develop coaching skills.
Yeah.
You've never done that. In fact, one of the things we always tell people is, up until now, your product was your product, but now your people are your product. So that's a very different mindset. You need to develop these new muscles. But the good news is, it's really not that hard. The fundamental thing that you have to have is you have to sincerely want to help your people get better. And that really speaks to your third point. You have to sincerely want to help them improve. And if you do, you'll have the trust that you need, because coaching is really predicated on trust. If your employee doesn't believe that you genuinely want to help them get better at their job, then it's not going to go well. But if they believe that, and for most of it, for me, I was trained that is literally what I'm being measured against. So I am incented to get people to develop in their job. In good companies, that's how you're judged as a leader. So I knew I had to learn these skills. Normally in a good company, you would never get promoted to a manager if you didn't have the third point you listed, if you didn't have that desire to help develop and build others.
In a good company.
In a good company, that's right.
In a good company. Okay, so let's move from coaching to the next topic you cover in your book, which is staffing. And maybe before we go into staffing, you can give us in a few sentences the difference between traditional product teams, then what we see a lot in the agile space being feature teams, and what you refer to then as a next step in the evolution, let's say it, empowered product teams. Maybe you can make that distinction a bit before we then go into the topic of staffing so that people can relate to that a bit better.
Sure. Well, and it very much relates to the coaching conversation too. Feature teams are a lot easier. Let's just admit it. They're a lot easier. That's basically just, somebody gives that feature team a roadmap of features and projects to build. There's specific solutions. So you need somebody to design those solutions, and then you need a set of engineers to build, QA, test, and deploy those solutions. Engineering is always hard. It's certainly at scale, but they're not asked to actually figure out or take responsibility for that solution working. In fact, that's the difference between outcomes and output. So feature teams are pretty straightforward. You might notice you don't really need a product manager in that. You need a project manager, but you don't really need a product manager. So most feature teams have somebody with a title product manager or a title product owner, but they're just backlog administrator. It's not what we're talking about. But in an empowered product team, where you want the teams to take responsibility not only for how they build, but what they build and whether that solution actually solves the underlying problem, you need some additional skills. And in particular, you need, well, the design and engineering are similar. They're just asking them to step up, but product is fundamentally different. Mm-hmm. When the whole idea of a real product manager came from empowered product teams, because now if you had to come up with a solution that actually worked, you have these missing needs on a team. You need somebody that really knows the customer and their buying situation, the constraint, and you also need somebody that knows your business. Needs to know how things are marketed, things are sold, how you pay for them, how you monetize them, what the legal issues are. Those are missing in the feature team, but they're necessary in an empowered product team. So you're back to, okay, where do we get those people? Well, we have to coach them. So that's why coaching is at the foundation of an empowered product team. That's how you share these skills, because the whole idea of an empowered product team is you're pushing decisions down to the team instead of the leaders making them. You're pushing it to the team, but they can't do that if they don't have the skills. So hence coaching. And of course, staffing's very related, because the better job you do on staffing, the easier it is to do the coaching, right? And the weaker you are at staffing, the harder it is going to be on coaching. So that's why they're so related. Staffing is a big topic on its own, but a lot of what we try to get people to understand is, in a good product company, the hiring manager owns the staffing. It's not HR. It's the hiring manager, because you are crafting a team. The team, like I said, the team is your product. Yeah. And so you are very carefully going out and recruiting the right people for this team, recruiting and then coaching the right people for this team. So yes, that's what I mean. We could talk more about empowered teams versus feature teams, but yeah, the big advantage I have is I spent most of my career with some really great product companies. And so I saw the difference between how they worked and so much of the rest of the world. And I was pretty stunned by that difference. And so what I'm really doing is sort of pattern matching. Here's what the good companies do, and here's what's not going on in the rest. And so staffing and coaching are right at the top of the list.
Yeah. So two things that your thoughts brought up. I think first, maybe we need to clarify. You mentioned a lot like a solution that works. And by that, you not only mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, a solution that works from a technical perspective, right, but a solution that works for the customer and works for the business. That's a huge difference between just a solution that works and, like, QA says, all right, it works. There are no bugs in it, right? But it needs to be working for the customer. Ideally, like, the customer loves it, right, and it delivers value for your business. The second piece that came up, you mentioned the staffing piece and the coaching piece. They are integrated, right? It's about recruiting the right people, and then it's about coaching them individually and also coaching the team. Now, in many organizations, especially those that try to do some version of Agile framework, whatever it is, but they usually distinguish between someone who's in charge of the product, right, being a product owner, product manager, whatever, and someone who's in charge of the team development, being a Scrum Master, Agile coach, whatever. What I was hearing from you, and correct me again if I'm wrong, was that the product leader not only coaches the product manager, but also coaches the overall team and ensures that this collective of people act as an A+ team, as a high-performing team. Did I understand that right? Or
you did? And I've started to explain, you're always searching for better ways to explain complicated concepts.
Exactly.
And we all are always in search of that. The feature team versus product team was an example that seemed to resonate with a lot of people. But one of the things that I really see is a difference between great companies and the rest. Mm-hmm. Is this question you're zeroing in on, which is how do you really scale? There are fundamentally two ways out there. What I see consistently in the best companies is they scale with their product leaders. Their product leaders are doing exactly what you just said, Sohrab. They are recruiting the right people, they're coaching them, and they are helping them to make sure they are a great team. The other way is trying to scale with process. And there are many processes out there, and they all, that's the other approach, is to scale with process. They try to make it a bit of a machine. I have never seen that work. I think I understand the reasons why it doesn't work in terms of consistent innovation. And this is where we get to, okay, we need these leaders that actually know product. They know how this works. They know what a great product strategy is. They know and are constantly worried about the dynamics of their team. So there is some things that obviously a Scrum Master can observe because they're right at the center. They're seeing the impediments. They can observe and contribute a lot. But most Scrum Masters have never been a product leader of any of those three, engineering, design, or product. So it's unfair, I think, to expect that they're going to be able to really make the change they need to make. At best, they can usually point out to the leaders, I think we have a problem here. Do you think you can help that? But yeah, this is really a fundamental difference between great companies and the rest, is how do you scale? And I'm a big believer that it comes from the leaders.
From the leaders. So in addition to the capabilities that we talked about earlier, right? The depth of understanding of the domain itself, the passion for developing people, the coaching skill to develop individuals in the product domain. Now, a product leader would also need to have skills to develop a team of people, because sometimes that's different than just developing the individuals. Sure. Or at least have an understanding of, okay, team development needs to happen. And if I don't have the skills myself, I can bring in, and you mentioned this earlier, right? Go grab a coach from the outside that helps you get this done, because you need to build this cohesive group of people, because otherwise great products are not going to emerge.
Yes. Now I want to be clear though, in practice, the way it's 90% of the time is when the design manager is coaching the designer and the engineering manager is coaching the engineers and the manager of product management is coaching the product manager. That's what, they know what the roles are. They know how those, and what are they coaching on? Well, a designer comes to the design manager and says, that damn product manager keeps handing me wireframes. What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? And the design manager says, well, you get used to that. That is a really common problem. So let me show you how we deal with that. Or an engineer complaining that, they've already decided the solution, even though they haven't talked to that engineer. That's another common problem. So these dynamics are happening all the time. It's not so much that one manager has to coach the whole team. Yeah. Each manager is coaching their people so that they can contribute. Because it really is true. A great product today requires a truly cross-functional team. It's not, some people think cross-functional team means you have a front end and a back end engineer. That's not what it means. These are very different skill sets: product management, product design, engineering. And we need each of those skills. Otherwise, there's a huge hole on that team.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So coaching, staffing, next one on the list. And I like that one particularly. Product vision and principles. And product vision is something where I think a lot of people also on this call, and maybe people that watch this call later or this conversation later, have some idea what a product vision is. But when I joined your workshop, I learned about something completely new. It was not just like one or two sentences that describe what we're going to build and why. You had something else in mind when it came to product vision, and you also added the concept of product principles, which I think is very interesting for people to understand, because that brings a whole new dimension to the topic of product. Can you walk us through that a bit, Marty?
Sure. And you know what? That's a good question, because it lets me, you'll see what I mean by leading with leadership, scaling with leadership versus scaling with process.
Yeah.
This is actually a great example of what happens at scale. There's so many misunderstandings around so many things to do with product. And one of the most dangerous ones is this idea that each product team should have their own product vision. Completely misses the point of scale. So in a significant, in a scaled organization, you could have 50, 100, 200 product teams all contributing to the same product. How do you know where you're all trying to get to? Well, we call that part of we call the whole context the strategic context. And that's product vision, product strategy, team topology, product principles. But in terms of the vision, that is describing the North Star that we're all trying to get to. You want every single person on every single product team to understand how their work contributes to that larger whole. Now, that's a big assignment. And by the way, that's not just for today. A good product vision will last for anywhere from 3 to 10 years. So and this is an inspiring thing. It's often the best recruiting tool we have. So a lot of people have never even seen a product vision like this because they've never worked at a company that really knew what a product vision was really even for. One of the things I like to do is in fact, on our svpg.com website, if you go to /examples, I share a lot of great examples of product visions that I like that do this well. They're almost always vision types, prototypes, videos of vision types, but they describe that future, that the company's trying to create. Now, the vision kind of describes what it's going to feel like. Product principles come at it from a different way. Product principles help capture your values. They try to capture when any given product organization is going to have to make thousands of decisions. I mean, that's just normal. Yeah. Thousands of decisions. And when you make decisions, you need guidelines. I will actually give you an example from early eBay. At early eBay, we had 4 product teams: a buyer team, a seller team, a search team, and a trust and safety product team. 4 product teams. It's pretty straightforward, small. The last time I was in eBay was a couple years ago, and there were hundreds of teams for each of those areas. It's huge, but at the time, okay, and that sounds logical enough, and it's not that hard for 4 teams to understand how it all comes together into a marketplace. But one of the first principles we needed was the monetization was actually coming from the seller team, because at eBay and a lot of marketplaces, that's where you make money. So in order for somebody to sell, they pay a listing fee and they pay a little bit called a final value fee if they sell the item. Okay, straightforward. So the seller team was doing everything they could to provide sellers more of what they needed. But we started to realize that some of those things, not all, but some of those things were actually hurting buyers. And so what do? That's an example of a product principle that's needed. We needed some way to reconcile the goals and needs of buyers with the goals and needs of sellers. And what we realized was most of the things you do for sellers are fine, but if they conflict with the needs of a buyer, that's a problem. Because what we really realized was there was a principle at work here, which is in a marketplace like eBay, if the needs of the buyer and the seller are in conflict, you have to opt for the needs of the buyer, because that's the only real reason sellers are there. So if you start ignoring those buyers, your business starts dropping. And by the way, we see that all the time. How many times have you seen the commercial part of a company start adding so much advertising that the customers are like, I hate this site, I hate this business. Yeah. And they realize they're hurting themselves. So anyway, yes, this is a big topic for sure.
Yeah. So product principles help you make decision or help guide decision making.
Right. That's exactly right.
Now, decision making, and this is maybe a bit off topic, and maybe it goes back to some pieces of the coaching piece, is such an important topic based on my experience. Because when I think about my own team, right, I have a product manager in our company that I work with. She then works with a group of engineers and designers. And if you just look at this small company, right, me as the founder and CEO, product manager or product owner, and then engineers and designers, there are so many decisions to take. And it's not always 100% clear who takes which decision. Mm-hmm. So in addition to providing guiding principles on decision-making, like buyer more important than seller in the example that you provided, how else do you approach this topic of decision-making also in the context of product leadership?
Yeah, good. Well, and by the way, the question you're just framing right here is one of the most common coaching questions that come up. Because how do you make a decision? Empowered teams, we know the team is supposed to make the decisions. Okay, that's the easy part. The hard part, but what if the team disagrees, right? What if the engineer disagrees with the designer? What if the product team disagrees with the CEO? These are really common questions and really important questions. So part of this is admittedly cultural. There are some companies where the culture kind of answers that question more, but I would argue in the best companies, this is why a cross-functional team is so important. So I haven't said this explicitly, but any of the people on this call that have read Inspired will know this, but in any product, there's sort of 4 big risks. Value, would they buy it? Usability, can they use it? Viability, will it work for our business? And feasibility, can we build it? Those are the 4 big risks. Well, when you're making a decision, normally if it's a technical feasibility related decision, it's easy. It's the engineering lead that makes that decision. Why would a designer make that decision? Why would a product manager make that decision? No, there's very specialized skills. Similarly, if the question is really about the user experience, we would defer to our designer. Our designer's actually trained and skilled in that. So of course we would defer to the designer. And if it's about value or viability, we would defer to the product manager, because those are the things they each have gone deep in. Now, the problem is that, I mean, the truth is 90% of the decisions that answers right there. Yeah. But those sometimes 10%. There's still a 10%. Sometimes they the engineer and the designer will agree that this is harder, but this is better. But then what do you do? So that's where we run a test. And teaching teams how to run a test is one of the most important things. You gave the great medical analogy earlier, which I loved. Haven't really thought about it, but it's really true. And a lot of times, yeah, as a physician, you're trained on certain things, but one of the things you do when you're not sure is you run a test. Exactly. You run a test. We need some data. So let's run a quick blood test. Let's check their blood oxygen level, whatever, because we don't know. And a good product team is skilled at running a quick test. And not only does that help resolve the differences between the team members, but a lot of times that's what helps us win an argument with the CEO. Mm-hmm. We run a test. So this is how decisions are made really on a daily basis. And coaching the team on how to make that good decision is a really common and important coaching topic. Because first of all, you don't want teams to over-test everything, right? A lot of times they will spend way too much time on really dumb things that are not important and not going to make the difference. And I'm like, you guys already, first of all, I'll say to the team, do you all agree on this? Yes. Do you think it's risky? No, then just make a decision and go.
Do it, yeah.
But on the other hand, if something really is risky, then we'll say, well, have you tested that? And if the answer is no, it's like, well, don't you think that's a problem? You are going, this is if this doesn't go well, there is a very serious consequence. So let's talk about the way you would test that. So this is what managers coach their people on almost every day.
Yeah. So also the topic of the scientific approach to things, or empiricism, as I like to call it. Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, we in our team and at every organization that I've been, the topic of decision making is, as you pointed out, one of the most important ones. And I think having product principles in place can address some of those. Yes. Having clear accountabilities in place, like design, engineering, product management, can address a large part of those decisions. And then figuring out how to deal with those 5 to 10% and coaching them on knowing what kind of tests to run and how to evaluate those tests is maybe part of the same thing that I learned as a medical doctor. When you're in doubt, run a test, right?
That's right.
Very simple, actually. But then the reality is a bit more complex than what we talk about.
But you know what? Let me just highlight, because that just captured very well what we're trying to do. And you can see why the best coaching will come from a manager that actually knows these things.
Exactly.
That can say, you know, I've run into this problem dozens of times. Let me tell you 3 different ways you could test this. You decide what you think is best, but I'll show you 3 different ways that work to test this. We'll talk about the pros and cons. Somebody who's never done this before, they have no idea. The most they could do is talk about what's in a book.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm keeping an eye on time. I would skip the topic of topology and strategy and team objectives. And maybe we get back to those, because there's also one question in there. And to me, the topic of transformation, which we addressed early on very quickly, I would love to spend some time on that. And the question that comes in is, someone has had or dealt with managers that are deep into tactics and feature factory. And at the same time, they miss to set focus on, for example, coaching their people into product or building up a solid product strategy. Now, this is one of those things that I believe is like one of those fundamental shifts that needs to happen in an organization. That's why we speak about transformations that need to happen. Like, how do you create the awareness for those transformations, other than saying the best companies in the world work this way, so you should probably do that too? And after creating the awareness, how do you support people to go on that journey? Because it hurts, right? It goes against like everything they have been taught in the past. And most senior leaders in organizations have many years of work experience under their belt, which means many experiences resulted in the habits and the culture that they created in their organization. How do you address this, Marty, you and your colleagues at SVPG?
Yeah, no, it's a very difficult question. First of all, I think it's really important to be honest with people that the vast majority of transformations go nowhere. And that's the reality. Most of them go nowhere. They spend a lot of money, often millions of euros, and doesn't go anywhere. Now, I think I've over time got a better understanding of why, and that's what is really important. But so I think the first thing to realize is that unless the top of the organization, the CEO, understands and is really taking a primary role in this, it almost never succeeds. Now, the reason that's the case, I believe, is because anybody who's been through one of these transformations, you know that it's not just product management, design, and engineering. It impacts sales, marketing, HR, finance, legal, compliance. It impacts all of the organization. And unless the CEO is on board, those other people will they will fight it. And if they, you can't just do it with one part. They'll fight it, and you get a lot of it goes nowhere. So the CEO needs to step up. Now, normally, there are a few things that cause the CEO to take this very seriously. One is that they all of a sudden they're competing with somebody really good, like an Amazon. Amazon decides to go into their business, their market, And, Amazon is pretty damn good at everything we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so that will often scare CEOs. In fact, that's the single biggest reason I hear from CEOs that they're like, we know we need to change because now we are losing market share.
Yeah. In a recent podcast, just to add to this, in a recent podcast, I heard you talk about Stripe being the catalyst for change in the financial services industry. And yeah,
it has. I mean, I love Stripe before that, but I really love Stripe after that because, that's what the financial services industry needed. They needed somebody to shake them up because it's no secret that most customers suffered. The products had gone nowhere for years. So now they're getting serious about this. So one thing that motivates a CEO is fear. Fear that their company is going to be disrupted by Stripe, by Amazon, by somebody that knows what they're doing. The second motivation for CEOs is often, greed. They see how valuable those best companies are, and they realize that if they get good at what we're talking about, they can literally 10x their market cap. And most of these CEOs are very incented by the value of their stock. And so if they realize that they have colleagues that have literally 10x their market cap and their value. And so they're like, yes, we want that. But those are the two main reasons, fear and greed, that seem to motivate companies to get serious about this. Unless the CEO is serious, I usually say it's just save yourself a lot of time and money because it's probably not going to change. So that's one of the things that we really learned. Now, at least in my world, most of the time the CEO is pretty convinced now. So that's not the problem. But now let's say the CEO is on board, is willing to do what they need to do. Now there's back to what you started asking about. It really depends on those product leaders, the managers of product design and engineering. The reason it depends on them is because product teams are only as good as the people on those teams. And the people we hold accountable for the skills of the people on the teams are these managers. So we have to get the managers of product design and engineering to step up and take responsibility for the quality of their teams. In fact, I've been telling quite a few directors or VPs of product, chief product officer, whatever title you like the best. I like to tell them that you will be judged on your weakest product manager.
Yeah,
so
it's a good one.
You need to make sure that everybody is at that level. And in fact, I'm like, don't give anybody the title product manager if they're not up to that. That is going to hurt them and hurt you. Make sure they are at the level they need to be. It's all about the people. That's the reality. It's all about the people. So we need to ensure that you have strong cross-functional product teams. And then it's really on a team by team basis. As a given product team is skilled and they're each person on the team is competent, can do what they need to do, then you can empower them. You can say, okay, here's what you need to do. Here's the problems you need to solve. Go do it. But until then, you really can't.
Yeah.
So and that means the leaders have to spend a lot more time hands-on than they want to.
Yeah, that's another one of those pathologies, as you call them, and they resonate with me as a medical doctor a lot. That I see a lot happening. A lot of people just run out there and say, "You need to empower them. You need to empower them." I'm like, empowerment is good, but if someone's empowered but doesn't know how to do it, they are also stressed. Right? I remember in one of my first jobs, someone said to me, "You have to do this." I'm like, "I have no idea how to do this." And they were like, "Figure it out." I'm like, "I literally have no idea how to do this. I need some help." And I was vocal enough to get that help. But there are a lot of people who are not that vocal, who are scared, and then it stresses them. So I think enablement comes first, really help people build up that capabilities, and then of course empower them. And I've come up with this analogy, and maybe it's something that also resonates with you, is Sometimes as a leader in an organization, independent from whether you're a product leader, engineering leader, design, whatever, you have to act as an actor. So you need to do the job yourself. You need to take the decisions. Then if your people know how to do things, you can move into the director role, right? Telling them what needs to be done, but not telling them how to do it, because they are capable of doing that. Yeah. And the moment they also have more context, and I love, like Reed Hastings from Netflix talks about this, lead with context, not control. Once you have provided enough context, you can move from the director role into the producer role, where you trust the directors and the actors create a great movie. And I think this is another tool that can help a lot of product leaders really distinguish, like, when do they have to act in which way, based on the capabilities and the context that their teams have.
Yeah, it's true. It reminds me too of another great Bill Campbell quote, which was, today you cannot be a good manager if you're not a good coach.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, the book is behind me on the shelf. The $1 Trillion Coach is full of wisdom. Yes. So Marty, being aware of time, we have 4 or 5 more minutes. And before everyone joined this conversation, I mentioned to you that there's a topic I want to quickly address with you. In the training that I joined, in the workshop that you facilitated, you mentioned that all of these topics that you cover in your book, you don't bring up Facebook as a company, as a case study, although they do all of these things really, really well. But from your perspective, and I'm paraphrasing, correct me if I'm wrong, they're not doing them in an ethical way. So they're not being responsible. Now, the whole topic of responsibility, and we have huge challenges out there, be it climate, be it democracies being in challenging situations. Who is in charge of making sure that the products, the services, the things that we build and create as organizations are responsible when we take the perspective of our society? Is that the product leader? And if yes, how do they make sure this gets into the company strategy?
Right. This is a big topic for sure. And just to be clear, unfortunately, it's not just Facebook but they are, a lot of companies, they're on the gray area, they're not all bad, but Facebook has, to me, the clearest example of just truly evil. And their people are very good. They're very skilled. That's kind of, if they were evil but not skilled, it wouldn't matter. They would be harmless, but they are very skilled in pursuing bad things. And I'm just crossed the line to me. But, so first of all, let's start at the basis. If we want to push decisions down to the teams have to consider this. So ethics has always been part of viability. So it's because viable means, is it viable for our business? And if you are an illegal business, that's not healthy, right? And so it's always been part of viability. And that means it's one of the product manager's responsibilities is to look at how is this product used. I do remember early at eBay, the founder, Pierre Omidyar, worried about bad actors very, very early. That's why one of the first 4 teams was a trust and safety team.
Yes.
If Facebook had cared enough about this from the beginning, I think it would be a very different world today. But they didn't. That was a choice. Now, Pierre was fundamentally ethical, honest, good person. I mean, I truly believe that. And that's why I joined the company. I really thought he was good at this. And other leaders don't have that view. Now, the product manager is often the first one to see these brewing problems. Like, if we do this, yeah, our customers are going to love it, but what does this do to children, or what does this do to the environment? We have to worry about those things. Often the product manager is the first one to see it. Now, just because they see it, though, doesn't mean that product manager can go to the CEO and say, we have to stop this. You have to be smart about this. And so I always first of all, there is a good book first book really that came out. It's on ethics, and it's by a guy who actually worked with me at eBay during these days. and he went to become the chief ethics officer at Airbnb, and he wrote the book Intentional Integrity. And that's the first book I know of about ethics in product. His name's Rob Chestnut, and I'd encourage anybody to read that book. And in fact, in Empowered, I interviewed him, and we put an article together about ethics, coaching ethics in there. And one of the things he really advises is when the product manager sees this issue, or anybody on the product team, the product manager needs to go to the product leader, go to their manager and say, okay, I need some help. I need some help because I'm worried that if we go in this direction, this might happen. What can we do to either prevent that bad thing from happening, or maybe we should look at a different way of solving this problem that doesn't have these bad externalities. So, and sometimes that leader will need to go to the CEO. Sometimes that happens. Most companies, in my opinion, are not like Facebook. They are not evil, and they don't want to do bad things. They want to do good things for the world. And if you go to them and say, this is what I'm worried about, they will engage in finding a better way. That's most of the time. And if you find you're at a company that you believe really doesn't care about the world, I hope you leave. That's what I've been telling my Facebook friends for years. Leave.
Yeah. But the stock is performing too well, and
I know. Well,
as you mentioned, greed being one of the motivators.
Yes,
that might be one of the problems. So, Marty, thank you so much for taking the time to participate in this conversation. It's been an honor. Everyone out there, if you haven't read this book, Empowered, highly recommend it. And Marty is currently offering his workshops in a virtual way, so that you don't have to travel to San Francisco to participate in one of those workshops. I took advantage of that earlier this year. It was really, really good. It also worked with regards to the time zone differences. Highly recommended. Marty, again, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for inviting me. They were great questions that you brought up, and so I hope this was useful to everybody.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. Bye.